Let me start by reading you her bio. Jennifer Sperry Steinorth has two books with TRP. The first is Awake with Nine Shades, which came out in 2019, and the new book, Her Read, which came out last week. Um, the first book, Awake with Nine Shades, was a finalist for Ford Review's Best Poetry Book of the Year, 2019. Jen's a poet, an educator, interdisciplinary artist, a licensed builder. She's received grants from Vermont Studio Center, Sewanee, and the MFA for Writers at Warren Wilson. And she's got new work and work from this book everywhere, including Black Warrior, Cincinnati Review, Michigan Quarterly, Missouri Review, Pleiades, Plume, Rhino, Tri-Quarterly, and everywhere else. We're very, very excited to welcome now my old friend Jen Steinorth. We've been working on this book so long, we go back, I think, a little ways now. But I think I want to let her start this off by showing you what an amazing book she's created. So I'll pass it over to Jen.
Thanks, Jay. And thank you all for being here. I'm really happy to share this work with you in live time and to share images from the text. I began this work in 2016, I should say, too enraged to write in the traditional way and yet filled with energy that I needed to channel in some way. And I had been interested in starting and doing a longer erasure. And I was at a library discard sale where they had all these fabulous mid-century hardback texts that were $1. So I found a book, let's see, that looked when I first got it, it looked something like this. And then that book came to look like this and is like all falling apart. The spine fell off, even though I kept it all wrapped up. And then the second version looked like that. And the third book that I made looked like that, which looks remarkably like this, which is the bound book, which Texas Review Press has done such a gorgeous job. I couldn't be more thrilled with with the production and how it all turned out. It's kind of beyond my hope. So what it is the source text is a work of criticism by Sir Herbert Reed, who is also a poet, an art scholar. And so it's a survey of art history from prehistory to the modern era. No female artists, however, are mentioned, despite many other artists that are named, until the third edition. And there's an absence of female artists, but there's a proliferation, of course, of the female body in the illustrations. And I was thinking very much about the ways that these images that are portrayed by men, both the paintings and the stories and the sculptures of men, are so deeply impactful in our identities, and coupled with the silencing of the female creative voice. And so I began this erasure, and I'll just read some of it to you. Oh, but I better share my screen. Let's see. So I'm going to read to you a section that is a mishmash because, in true fashion, this book itself is something of a mishmash, something of a Frankenstein. We'll begin at the beginning and we'll end almost at the end. And I'm going to read straight through, but of course I'm going to leave a whole lot out. So I'm not going to tell you when I'm leaping from one place to another, but it's all kind of threaded together. So I will begin, and then it'll be about 15 minutes that I'll read, and then we'll talk. So this is the table of contents. I art soft in between. I art not golden. I'm a distortion of what we picture as human. I art our motives. A prim fusion of orange and plum, I poach in disaster. I art no escaping the imp factor. Or Barbie. I art's point. I toys view, I other in intimate value. Note, I wish to thank Mr. Reed, the author of the source text, for very kindly lent pains, and on the left you'll see all of the artists who have work in the illustrations that appear in the text, and Barbara Hepworth is smack in the middle, pushing them in out of the way, because of course that's part of the fear, right? That there isn't room for all of us. The imp is, properly speaking, what is common to all the arts, and is the best starting point of our inquiry. Only the free create the imp. Any man responds to a pleasurable discomfort. The opposite of I is equally rare. I have already a theory of imp beauty native to my own fluctuating phenomenon, manifest in the course of history, uncertain and often baffling his own sense of beauty, to admit the realm of other. Is negation of at the bottom of acute pain? And I, the lovely lace ruff which adorns him, but actually we do make such a sensuous impression of vitality that a man sees and feels the object, sees its universal imp, sees the one in many, the many in one, at his peril. I remember a pain that he called fine, from which ivory, bone, silk, wool, Paris. The ass is his especial cathedral, conceived as walls enclosing a space, and as such must be viewed from within, or as a face defining a mass, and as such must be looked at from without. If we mind his rose and passage his child, amusingly he relates how pain is in the hands of a master. Even Leonardo had to touch my whole open window, as it has been called, with his manual dexterity and a scientific aim at feeling me not in control of his effects. He ran. Except to suffer amour is splendid. Its innumerable domes and minarets and the extraordinary refinement of its ornament. I is, can be never deprived of that power, power to birth myriad selves. I rat, I apple, I ire, I mind, I spirit transcendent, I overstep limits, I mean, I harmony, I bacon, I strange, I port, I architect, I den, I obey, I servant, I master, I pure, I particular, I O king, I free play, I Egypt, I here again, I dent, I age, I ritual, I essential, I other, I change. Icon, I convent, I cult, I object, I kin, I origin, I model, I clay, I baby, a bundle of papyrus stems lashed together, and over I lay, the papyrus being very stiff and firm. O heart, O human continent, over which stretch the skins of human terror. Sadism is intense. Myth and folklore, fairy tales and horror, we know too little, too much about our own righteous dog. I practice a disinterested appreciation, a state of passive receptiveness, as Roger Fry called it, and so find endless pleasure. We know a flu penetrates I. We know an ohm stretching from island through to the Renaissance. Oh, oh, we come to be mother. Other, other, as ever mother we conceive. Hand of my mom, mi mum, madre, ma mère, mama, mama, soft, sinward, strange, uncontent to remain outside. But softly we hum, feeling worser and worser, slowly learning our mum's genius is buried in the cellar. Thirst is a discipline of color, of pain, a brush, a brush, a brush, and years of rain. Thirst is author and judge of mother. It makes then passes through her fingers. Ink every vulgar mother whole story. A sung story conceives a story. Please let us refashion the story. I may suggest love is a professor, two round arches crossing a vault. The vault suggests great height, which in turn involves a buttress, the buttress a pinnacle, and so on. But that does not explain the overwhelm that meets you as you enter me, your feelings roused by no solution of engineering. How we spoke one language, subterranean masters, indulging fancies between thinks. Go to, it was never land, a dynasty of dumb grace we could not escape, middle age, intact. Oh, virgin, with the lust of angels and curs, at beloved's behest, I played thee. Masters say pain is dominated by the whip of longing. Masters say pain is the dominion of ecstasy. Masters say pain is a dominatrix, is Italian. Say love in italics, apply hot wax. Sweet boy, this is a process can only be described as loving care. Comes lowliness, comes surprise, comes in a hood, in a van, in a cot. Act natural, frond of fern, petal of flower. Lowly, the highest expression of sainthood, sweet head tumbling out, a van, a cot, my mouth. Let's all pose for St. Francis. The landscape expects to consort with ecstasy. Pull back your hood, pull back my head. The dead is no actual person, cries, Master, Master, read me top to bottom. Master, Master, read me under the covers. Master me over the others, bottom to top, bottoms up. Let's all drink the Virgin. Master, sweet Master, peace me. Let me drink you under the table, spread like butter, where my thigh, there but for a white, unmarked van go I, but for the grace of a waxwork saint. Oh, oh, you found my stigmata. Mister, I am not your masterpiece. Darling, you're my very best virgin. Don't you know, if pain be real, the best virgins are the ones who play pretend? Between the virgin and me, flesh can only be discovered by ship. I scarcely fret the waves at the foot of our fantastic fur bed. Escape pain, be no more as wallpaper, escape in moonlight, picture discourse, always dangerous things in pain, be able as pain, mind we whole, escape pain, alive erasure, invent how it evolves, arm our sisters in moonlight, escape pain, stars, a faint setting sun, be the eye to be satisfied, escape paintings, escape painters, escape no strange, oh, mouth chanting, escape, say nothing, define morphology, inspire, escape, paint, pain, call it love, a conscious lion, dispense with escape, paint openly, paint as we, no I, excess. Limitations are obvious. He, his he, compose he of the he from the he before him, his subjects given him by his he. One may tremble to conceive such a Superman. For to part his he from he pains and pains her, he and his. I medium weep. His eye, the whole canvas, our eye waters closing to attend what under and under the troubling sings of lake, the lake of the lake we make of she. The costume into which we are born is old-fashioned. In the blue of war, over yellow roads, in cities, on stage, in plastic wards, bare-faced and desert-shorn, we have borne masters. No memory of an unborn master. Yet must we be born one or the other? Could we be neither and wonder? Mind child, mind not our professors of shame, their fine nervous lines, their rank religious fantasy. To love yourself is no lunacy, or if lunatic it be, give us the key to the lunatics. Theirs is the only music. They speak to us in the language of the dead reborn, reread. There, child, we need not be afraid. Between dog and wolf there is nothing, much less love. But between a shadow and the sun, there is a body. Over a harp, out of a lute, naked, wounded, a bird-headed corpse stoops. Perhaps we should all be lunatic, living in blue-green provinces. We might return to the burying ground, dig deep and sing our great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother's blues. Let us sing their bitter fruit. This is my body broken for you. But enough of sacrifice. Perhaps we are too fragile. Let us discuss the line of our new lady's shoe. I want only to think of a great lady's shoe. Accents of such individuality, of almost endless variety, the shoe, not green memory residues. A human being drifts through time like an iceberg, only it will not carry us far. So let me dispense with sentimental speculation, moody exaggeration, and attempts to reclaim our lost art, cutting apart what is great, to mourn our lost art. Perhaps I have only to appreciate the applied arts, which create a psychological document. For still we paint our faces. Still we cut ourselves in private places. We eat too much or we do not eat, and all have been ill. Becoming a portrait to wed. Becoming as a mirror to wed. A slip of self reflected in a fountain. For what is the self left in the clay? The world, Venus, the end delicate, a ship, wine, wonder, the cave, glory, longing, truth, folly, ornament, piety, mystery, grace? I'm not going to answer that question. Another country are possible. We know the mind is stored with countless records of past which may, when struck, surface again in color, having been hidden so long from light. And in various countries, in the soil in every part of the world, we find an intimate desire to impart color, as inward another eye moves. We have only to ask, only to answer, "This is my body breaking for you." Just 2 more pages. In this book, to get many of the mays had to be restructured, and the imps freed from impressionist impressions, and from painters' paintings and paints came our pain. In this book, every she is a construct, a remodel, a reconstruction, a symbol born of destruction. Likewise, each her derives from here and there, where and whether, either, rather, and other, and, on the other hand, becomes her hand, floating above her hand. Oh, her hands, a stone, this branch, hand in hand by her own hand she is becoming. And yet, by my own hands and this raw biopsy, I confess, a few she's carving and cutting does not satisfy. No, not when there are others we have yet to see, to hear. Oh, love, would you would add your own mark here, and every otherwhere. For alas, we have long been surgeons, remodeling vital organs, cutting away at life as if we might recover the dead, arousing with fantasies of reformities. Does the new pain differ from the old? Like wind and water must every eye be explored, tree and branch, lake and blood, otter, roach, cosmos? Behold, instead of mother and child, I offer up Frankenstein's portrait. Dearly begotten son of Mary, old Frank might say, "This is my body Baroque, yo." The monumentality she achieves with her grave technique, her cutting and piecing, is apparent in the manner her mind child conceived becomes 3, part sculpture, part theater, part hospital. Oh, Mr. Reed, touch me where I bleed. Put your sensitive hands in the wound. We are great reservoirs. And this portrait, a performance, an eye refrain, casting light and shade. Baby, this is our offspring. All right. Thank you all. And before we go further, I'm going to introduce J. Bruce Filler because he told you a little bit about himself, but not like, quite enough. Because he is in addition to being a fantastic editor and director of Texas Review Press, is also a fantastic poet. If you were not already aware, I'm going to move over to my cheat sheet here. He is a Wallace Stegner Fellow from 2016 to 2018. He has a doctorate in poetry from Louisiana University, 3 chapbooks, The Dissenter's Ground, Lancelot, and Flood. His poems have appeared in Southern Review, Crab Orchard Review, McNeese Review, Birmingham Review, and Louisiana Literature, as well as elsewhere. And he teaches at Sam Houston State University, which is the home of Texas Review Press. And he is a dear friend and a character as well. So,
maybe overstated a little.
The character bit?
Well, in mixed company, sure. Yeah, so this is supposed to be a conversation, I think, between me and Jen about how this book came to be. And as I've been kind of preparing for this the last couple of days, I realized that it's been a very long journey to get this beautiful book made. That I'd forgotten a lot of the pieces of it. We were talking last night about the conversation and ended up, I think, exploring some things we had otherwise forgotten. Um, as Jen said, this book took a long time to write. How long would you say, not including the editing process, which we'll get to later, have you been working on this? 4 years total?
Yeah. Yeah, I started it in the summer of 2016, and then I finished the first book. So most of the language was all pinned down at the end of the first book, with a couple of little tweaks that happened in the second and the third. But that the language was pinned down, and that was finished right after we went into lockdown. Like at AWP, right before AWP, I was working on it, and just after I got back from the ghost AWP, that I just happened to be in Texas at the time, so I stayed for AWP, um, and then finished the book shortly thereafter.
I just happen to be in Texas all the time these days. Um, so I'm from the other side of the border.
Oh, I forgot to say that Jay's from Louisiana. That's
If
like
if you
critical
talk to me for
information.
4 minutes, you'll find that out. We're very proud people. So I knew Jen was working on this book as early as 2019. Actually, yeah, 2019,
2018.
2018. Really? Has it been that long?
Yeah.
2018, where we met at Sewanee Writers Conference. And throughout our time there, she had kind of mentioned that she was working on this. I think I had seen a bit of it. Although, if I recall, your reading at Sewanee wasn't from this, it was from another project. Is that right?
No, actually, it was from this.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember the reading being very uh, powerful. To kind of fast forward, I was at Sewanee that year, about to come here to start working at TRP, and in fact, accepting the job had only happened a day or two before I left for Sewanee. So I had not been here yet and didn't really know what I was getting into. So I had mentioned to Jen that I was coming down here to be an editor. And
Well,
yeah,
I have to interrupt you there because I didn't know you were going to be. I don't think you were
really?
telling people that you were going to be an editor. Maybe you were, but I don't think you didn't tell me,
Yeah, I was
because when I sent my book to you, it was because,
not
yeah, it was because can I just interrupt you and tell my version of this part of the
sure.
story? Because I've already done that.
This is your party, you know?
Well, so I Jay had sold out of his chapbooks at Sewanee, and I was telling, we were in the same workshop together. Like, I just have to back up one more second. So I walked into the cafeteria on the first day, and I'm looking around with my tray of food, and I like look at a bunch of tables that are full, and then I look to my immediate right, and there's a table that has just one person sitting at it, and that person like looks up and sees me see him at the same moment, and I'm like, well, it'd be really rude to walk away now. So I like go and sit down, and then, as I've said, we established Karakura. So we ended up being in the same workshop together, and but his chapbooks sold out. And when I told him that the chapbooks had sold out and I hadn't bought one yet, he said, well, I'll just send them to you. And so he sent them to me, and as a sort of return gesture, I sent him my one chapbook and this manuscript that I had been uh, making the rounds with.
Yeah, so Laura Donnelly is here laughing. She was at the same Sewanee. In my defense, I had had a very long cross-country flight from the West Coast and had had many of those recently and was just kind of over it. Um, plus I was taking a new job, and when I left, we didn't have a house. We didn't have, my wife didn't have a job. I didn't know. I got on a plane to Sewanee, like what a flex on my poor wife. Um, to do the hard work while I got to, get drunk with writers every night. But fast forward, and I'm in Texas, and I hadn't been here long, and this brick of a package shows up from Michigan, and it had a manuscript in it. Um, and that happens for those of us who are editors. That happens a lot. I was gonna set it to the side and get to it later, but then I kind of sat down with it and I read the first page and then I read the second page and then I read the third page, and I had just been in workshop with Jen only like a month earlier, but these poems were like on a completely different level for me. Like I read the entire book um, in one sitting and gave her a call and asked her if she'd let me publish it at a publishing house she'd probably never heard of at the time. And that's how Awake with Nine Shades got to be. But those of you who know Jen Steinorth know that she thinks around the whole subject. I think is a good way to put it. And she's a very meticulous thinker about her work and her career and how it's presented. And very smartly, uh, very deftly, very kind of evilly, now that I think about it, when I offered her the contract for the first book, said, well, I've got this other thing too, and I want a 2-book deal. So me being the new acquisitions editor here, and I had no books lined up. This was the first contract that I did as editor at TRP. I said, you know what? Let's do it. So we'll get to the editing part of things later, but as far as the acquisition stuff goes, take a 2-book deal on something I had only heard and never seen really for a book that wasn't finished that would be published years later. I probably should have thought that through. I don't know.
Well, I have to offer defense in that too, because in my defense, I was at Vermont Studio Center at the time when Jay said, hey, I want this book. And it's true that I had not heard of the press, and that manuscript was just beginning to hit in some places. Like it was a finalist a couple of times. And I was like, oh, uh, okay. But also I was there with working on the erasure, and Anne Waldman had come into my room. She was the visiting guest person, and she was looking at these images, and I was telling her that somebody, she's like, this is awesome and you need to get it out into the world, but you're not going to get it out without a first book. Like no one's going to take a risk on doing this like expensive project if you don't already have a book in the world. Who is it that wants your book? What you ought to do is try to get a 2-book deal. And I, in my
So
head,
Ann
I'm like,
Waldeman is who I need to be on the phone
yeah,
with.
you need to be on Anne,
All right.
because I was like, ha, that'll never happen. That never happens.
We'll bump into each other eventually. I'll tell it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is just good advice for authors. Press your advantage. She knew I wanted the first book, and there were some other very impressive presses that were interested that I needed to sneak it away from. So I used our very short friendship as a lever myself, and we did the deal. And um, I will say that as an editor, it's real easy to sign a book deal 2, 4, 5 years out because you can just do the contract and you don't have to think about it for a good long while. Um, but with this book being so different, it really has kind of been a 2-year now publishing process. Um, so much had to be considered for the production of the book. I was unsure for at least the first year if we could even do it. Um, I had thought that we could. We had done, our looking into it. We had done some basic talks about how we wanted it to appear. We knew we wanted it to be hardcover. We knew we really wanted it to be a 3-piece binding with cloth on the spine. That kind of stuff is relatively easy compared to figuring out how to get about 250 pages of color photography into print. I told her we could do it. I believed we could do it. I don't know that I was sure we could do it. So we focused on the first book, and I, for the first year, pondered the production side of things. And the first book came out in 19. It was very well received. It's a beautiful book. You should all check that out. But, very kind of soon after, your thoughts have to turn to the iceberg coming up the path there, which was, how are we going to make her read? You want to talk about the editing process? Because this is not an easy project to edit. You've seen the versions that she did, which is actually more the editing process.
Yeah, do you mean like the from my end editing? Like my own
Yeah, well,
editing?
I think you showed the different versions, and I was seeing these kind of come across my desk over that period of time, and knew that she was making changes. And as an editor, you don't necessarily like uncertainty in your projects. I knew the book was in process. I knew that it was being changed, but what the author was going to deliver to us, I couldn't be sure. We do this all the time. We take books on spec that aren't even written yet, and you just never know. But with this one, unlike with prose, I didn't know how I was going to edit it. And I wasn't entirely sure that I should be the person editing it at all, which was a process that we talked about quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I would be like, so what do you think? And and be
Ah,
like, yeah, I think it's working.
thank
Like,
God it was
keep
good.
going. Like, I'm not
And
gonna
Jen, if
make you.
this had been like, a total piece of crap, I don't know what we would have done. Like, there's no way to undo a line, right? Often in a book of poetry, I'll say, hey, this line's no good, cut it, or break it here, or vice versa, any kind of regular editing that you would do on your poems. But these are set in space, set in color, using 5 6 different media to make them. And if I say this line falls flat, that whole page is bunk. And there are some pages in the book that are excised, right?
Yeah. So I would end up yeah, like pages got stitched together. That's where the first stitching comes into play, because that was a troubleshoot. Because if you, at first I tried to glue pages together, and the construction of a book is such that if you glue the pages together, it doesn't, it like won't do the bending that it's supposed to do when you turn a page. So it makes a mess. And I grew up with fabric. My mom's an amazing, it can make anything with cloth. And I grew up knowing how to sew. And I was like, oh, this is how I get around this. This is how I can close something while still giving it play to move, like a garment. And then it occurred to me that stitching was, so then that solving that problem became integral to the whole book, um, which happened a lot in the making of the book. And it also happened with things like line, like where you want a line to break. If I'm working with a page and I wanted to try to evoke some kind of a rest, I couldn't change the placement of the words on a page necessarily until the end, where I started cutting them out and moving them around. But in the earlier parts, but I could do other things with line or color that would make some kind of a fracture or cluster certain things together. So a lot of the visual became a way of editing for the to create the lines.
Yeah, and
Um,
as those pages are coming through, um, the book does it, as it edits itself in a way that the production of it became a version of editing. And I tell my students that sometimes being a good editor is not how much you can change, but how much you can leave alone. And in this book, I had to leave a lot alone and trust my author, even though I hadn't seen the whole thing. In some points, I would get a phone call where she says, I'm making another version. Um, you know, I think that happened twice at least. And you've just got to kind of um, trust the process of what Jen was doing. And as a poet, I was already very respectful of her work and a fan of her work. So I was able to we had worked together before on a book. So I was able to give her that leeway, just kind of some days hoping that it came out good, and then some days knowing that it was going to come out good. And that probably went back and forth, for at least a year. And I will say this too. The first pages that I saw, and in fact, the first pages of the book, I think the first 12 or so, are strictly whiteout. The first version of this was a lot more whiteout, if I recall.
Mhm.
And when you are visualizing something that is visual and you haven't seen it yet, and it first comes across, um, those first few pages of whiteout, I was like, I'm not sure this is going to work for 250 pages. We've all done whiteout erasures probably at some point, and like that is a classic erasure thing. You'll have to tell them in a second about your problems with whiteout now. Um, that was a long process, the whiteout process. But I started seeing pretty early on the author editing her own process, which I thought was fascinating. And I'm going to have to work this book into a curriculum one day because next thing you know, I'm seeing color. Then I'm seeing the original artwork being modified, to which I then have to call legal and talk to the author and say, do we have the rights to these famous works and can we desecrate them for money? We went through some of that businessy stuff. Then the thread comes along, which is beautiful when you see the actual book. And I have had the privilege of actually holding the ones on the back of her shelf there. But then I think, how is this going to photograph? How is this going to come across? What about these page numbers? Is this going to confuse everybody? And I was actually just thinking a second ago when you were showing one of the pages had thread on it. And when I saw how well the thread photographed, I knew that we were going to be good. But all of those steps from my point of view or my end, the editorial end, were all risks that paid off and all very fascinating to watch you do.
There was a big learning curve along the whole way, but one of the big learning curves was figuring out how to photograph it also, which was which didn't think I was gonna need to do at first, um, and then realized that the method the first method we tried didn't work for photographing. And by that time, I had gotten a lot better at photographing and doctoring it because I needed to in order to send excerpts out into the world to try to do the thing where you send your work to journals and such. And so by the time it was a problem that the photographs weren't like it was discovered in production that the method that we were going to use wasn't going to work out, I had already kind of figured out another way to do it.
Yeah,
And it
luckily,
wasn't
because
quite right, but I could tweak it and make it work.
yeah, that was a kind of a dark day when the first scans came back and we got them here at the office. I was just like, this isn't going to work. I know Jen's not going to like this. Sent them over. We looked at them. We talked about them. We knew it wasn't going to work. And this kind of thing happens, you know, I would imagine often. And we as a press were just committed to making the book. And I just said, don't sweat it. We'll find another way. Uh, I would say that I, as an editor, and Jen, as an author, probably both grew alongside each other in this process because I'd never done a book this kind of wild. I'd done some art books, but nothing quite like this.
And I knew that well, I build homes. Like we build custom homes and design them. That's something I do in another part of my life, which definitely informs my work as well. But one of the things about that we tell clients is that a custom home is not like anything that you buy in a store or like walking into a home and buying it, because you get to witness all of the mistakes that happen along the way and like the troubleshooting that happens, especially with custom, because you're making a thing that hasn't been made before for the first time. So there was a degree to which I was like, okay, this isn't right, but it's okay. We can figure it out. And I do think that with these odd creatures that are coming into, like, that some people here I know are also doing that kind of work, that it's like it's helpful to keep in mind the, like, I don't know. And then because we're talking about birth, because I had this idea, I'm like, can we call it? I can't remember what I wanted to call it, first of all, which is a little bit too graphic. Jay said, like, no, we can't call it that. It sounds like, oh, I wanted to call it Her Read, a graphic birth.
A graphic
And,
birth, I think, was the first.
and he's like, no, 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 that's too messy. I'm like, but the thing was messy. Like, it was all messy. And when one of my, I'm a mother also, and my first son was born, and we had a midwife, and the midwife would teach, one of the classes that she taught was called um, birth and variations of normalcy or something like this, that was like, there's this huge range of things that are all normal, and then there are things and that are like okay, but like within this messy variation pool, and like this is what happens in any of these cases, and then here are these other cases in which like you know the SWAT team comes in. And
I've never heard you give that exact metaphor, but now that you say it, that's exactly kind of how this book was made. We had a kind of range that we were shooting for, a quality range, and there was a lot of problems through every step of the book that we had to kind of get in and figure out. And it took a lot of trust from my author to trust that we were going to be able to pull it off. And there were a lot of days where I just did not believe that we were going to be able to produce a product that the author was happy with or that we could share with the world. And
but you didn't tell me that.
no,
You were
because
like,
I'm good
we're
at my
gonna do
job.
it, and like you kept fulfilling the promise. Like,
You don't know what I've been through, Jen.
I
Um, yeah, because you don't want to freak your authors out. I mean, that's editorial 101. We'll figure it out. You know, we have resources and people, and I would often have to talk between, departments and make promises that I wasn't sure that I was going to keep, but I was pretty sure that we could do, um, within a kind of messy range, as you were saying, right? Like, so that when the book comes out, it's saleable and the author is happy. And that's just kind of, as we went through the process, what I was trying to aim for every time. And production on a full color hardcover book that's, heavy. This is 1.2 pounds a piece. So when you buy it, you'll get your money's worth. The boxes are very heavy. Everything in a project like this is more expensive and more difficult from a publisher standpoint. Shipping, printing, binding, all of it, had to be considered, all the while Jen is making the art that I had not yet seen. So, there were probably some tense times through there. But Jim, maybe I thought you might give some advice to the writers here who are working on something like this. Like, what things have you learned in this process that you think other authors working on similar stuff should know going in? Because I'm not sure that if I was to set off with a project like this, that I would know everything you've learned.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't set out to do an art book. I set out to do an erasure, and the art all came with like problem solving, as I kind of said, like, because I too was like, I don't think a whole book of this whiteout is gonna work. I think I need to keep, like, I would like push the limits of the rules I had given myself until I'm like, yeah, now I see a possibility that requires breaking the rule. So I'm going to break the rule, and from here on out, that rule will be broken. And the rules just kept breaking. And then I thought, like, that's how society evolves also, right? Like, somebody breaks the rules because they've had enough with them. And at first it's like, and then like, we're like, wait, we don't really need that rule. Um, so I guess the book was teaching me the whole time, and I do think the the it's this dance, right, between setting up a conceit for yourself or some kind of a scope for a project, and then like the discovery. I mean, one of the wonderful things with this kind of book is because it's so material, so the materials can teach you things, um, that if you're open to being taught, uh, to discovery. And so but I did teach myself how to photograph the book, and like then how to work with photograph, and then how to store digital files. Like there's way too much
Oh man.
knowledge of digital stuff, which is not my domain. I know how to sew, I know how to like, so I
Yeah,
do
see,
think,
every time we talk about this, a new problem I'd forgotten about comes up. Storing these files was a mess
yeah,
when she sent them over, and they're large, uh,
yeah,
computer files, one for each image in the book. And we have a very large server here that I had to call IT and say, we need more, I need 8 more gigs. Like, I think the book was 8 gigs worth of uh, just the digital versions, and they had to up our server limit. I had to move them into Dropbox. They were too big to send,
yeah,
right? They were massive files. I was moving them back and forth, took all day, and there's hundreds. And then, like, she had them very meticulously set in order and in folders. And then as I'm moving them over, I'm desperately trying to make sure that I don't get something out of order, which surprisingly in 258 pages only had one. We only had one thing get out of order. We caught it, we fixed it. Um, it was fine. But teaching yourself how to make the book, I had to teach myself a lot about how to produce the book, and that was just one thing that I never even crossed my mind. We've got terabytes of space, and Jen's book broke it. So we
I
got
want
an
to,
additional server. It's sitting on now. It's completely safe. It's all good.
I'm wondering if we should ask folks about questions, if they have any questions. And I also, but I also want you to say, Jay, because I am also curious, because this book is the first book in a series, contextual, that's about work that illuminates at the intersection of text and image. And I am curious, like, how you would define what kinds of things you're looking for as an editor for future work. And maybe we could also, if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, while y'all
I'm
are
just looking at the clock and I don't want to.
while y'all are mulling over questions, sure, I can talk about that. The, if you're working on a project like this, um, you're going to have trouble finding a publisher for it. And that is just because of the cost, the process. A lot of presses can't kind of handle something like this. And I wasn't sure that we could either. But we started this series knowing this would be the first book in it. And Jen has set a very high bar for any other books that come in. But we wanted to have a spot in our list, or a spot in our acquisitions, where these kind of projects could get equal consideration. We get thousands and thousands of regular poetry books every year. But I think if you're working on a project like this, you're going to find it hard to find any place to send it. Um, so we wanted to create some kind of space. What that series looks like going forward um, is, I think, for both me and Pete, kind of up in the air. But like anything, we're looking for something special and outstanding, because we're not going to be able to do many of these very often. And um, that being said, though, you're starting to see a lot more presses enter into this kind of space. You're seeing a lot more poets doing big erasure hybrid art projects. They're becoming very, very common, very mainstream, and very successful. So I expect that the market will open up, slowly but surely. Um, But Jen's right. The more you can learn how to do on your own and take off your publisher, the easier the whole process will go. Does that answer your question, Jen?
Yeah, kind of.
I mean, I don't know. I think I basically boiled it down to send us good work. So do that.
There's a question here from Vincent. It says, thanks for great conversation. Jen, you mentioned other pursuits in custom building. Did you borrow any particular aesthetic principles or strategies in your construction of her read? That's a great question. I think so, yes. I think a lot about proportion, which is critical, thinking about thinking about spatial relationships. Like even just sometimes when I'm working with students, and you don't have to be in construction to do this, like thinking about how much space a moment takes up on the page versus the other moments, like is interesting. And certainly in this particular book, how, like I said, how I would rearrange, try to think about line and manage that would sometimes have to do with organizing space that came from the ways I was thinking about drafting homes when I'm doing that kind of revision, which is like, you know, thinking first about arrangements of rooms and then like tweaking how they fit together and like what the entrances are between how one moves. But there weren't like like, you know, I wasn't like thinking about like, oh, Queen Anne's are like this, I'm going to apply that the to the construction, to her read, or yeah, if that, I don't know if that answers your question.
Katrina asked in the chat, does the press have an open reading period for this series? The answer is not really, as this first book was taken via, solicitation. But we do have an open reading period for the press every April and May. And I like to see strange things come through in that reading period. It's not restricted to really anything. It could be short projects, long projects, fiction, poetry, nonfiction, chapbook length, full length, and hybrid. So that's our kind of point in the year where we kind of allow anything to come in that's not solicited, and we go through that, and if anything catches our eye. In the future, if something were to come in through that open reading period that was art, hybrid, something along these same lines, we would automatically think of this series for it. So sometimes our books get put into series by editors. Sometimes our books get put into series because they fit somewhere, and that's what we would do here. And then I guess if we caught wind of something interesting, we might solicit for this as well. So it's just a matter of finding those projects that are getting out there, and the open reading period is probably the best way to do that at this point.
Laura Donnelly asked, she said, Jen, you mentioned breaking various rules as you work through the book, starting with the whiteout. What were some of the other rules that you established and then broke? Yeah, so one of the rules that came, one thing was that I was just going to use whiteout. And at some point I realized I wanted the words to be read in multiple directions. And in order to show that, I needed to create some arrows. So I introduced some ink to like show the multiple ways. And then at some point I saw a word that I had to like, I knew I wanted a word that I couldn't find whole. And so I spelled it out. Like I found the letters in the text and spelled it out. And then before I did that, before I went so far as to doing that, even from the beginning, the first page, I broke a rule, which is sometimes in erasure, they want, like, you can only use whole words that appear in the text. Like, if the word impressionist appears in the text, you use the word impressionist. And so because the language was so abstract and Latinate, I immediately was like, this is not going to work if I can't look for words inside of words. So the imp came from, finding imp in the word impressionist, or the king in thinking. So the pig in pigment. So those were like rules I started breaking from the get-go, by necessity, because I'd picked not a book of fiction that had, great nouns and verbs in it, but this scholarly tune.
Okay, and Arvo asks, once you started with erasure, did you feel like you had to stick to that form? How successful could a hybrid collection be?
Oh, I feel like hybrid could be super successful. You should answer this too, Jay, but I mean, I just kind of started with this. I guess I get kind of obsessive, and I started with this text and I was kind of determined to see it through, like, to the end, and see where, like, that's an aspect of the constraint that I wasn't really willing to let go of. Uh, and I knew afterwards I could cut stuff out that didn't work anyway. But I could see a hybrid working, and I feel like maybe Layli Long Soldier, whereas I'm not sure how, if there's technically erasure in that, but it feels like sort of there's parts in there that are akin to erasure because it's responding to documents and like lifting language out of documents. Tracy K. Smith, recent book, has erasure mixed with non-erasure, but some of the non-erasure, not Peter, Philip Metris also is integrating erasure with other kinds of stuff.
Yeah, and I see a lot more. I rarely see this type of top-down huge project come across my desk. I see a lot of books come in our contest submissions or open reading submissions that are mostly poems, but then one page of art, one page of some kind of play erasure. I'm seeing a lot of books where every 3 or 4 poems there's an erasure poem, a blackout poem. Say, I see a lot of those. So I think poets are already kind of hybridizing their books. You look at Olio, Time Burgess, look at Diana Corey Wynn's Ghost of, like those books are like absolutely doing both. I think in the case of Wynn's book, I mean, it's absolutely critical to the work itself. It absolutely follows along with the whole premise of the book, the tone, subject, everything, And when I see something that's ingrained that well, that's going to catch my eye as opposed to a few poems and then, an art piece and then more poems and then an art piece, which I do see quite a bit of. Yeah. So I hope that helps. Okay.
Cool.
It looks like we got all the questions and we're a little over, but we're good on time. And I want to thank everybody again for being here and listening to Jen and me kind of wax romantic about making a book. It's one I'll never forget, that's for sure. So I hope you all check it out. It's available everywhere.
Yeah, somebody from TRP should maybe put the link to purchase the book in the chat, just in case. I mean, really.
All right. Well, you asked me.
Also, you have to learn to market.
Really. you asked me to have a conversation. Usually I'm the one that does this. The link is now in chat.
Thanks.
Please check it out. And we think it's worthy work. So thanks for listening and looking.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming. It's lovely to share this work so long in the closet and like pull it out and share.
All right. See y'all later.
God.
Bye.